agreed, in common with other Zoom users, that we don't invite introductions to each paper. We invite questions and responses from the team, but in the interest of trying to keep the whole meeting within reasonable scope time-wise, we're not going to ask. So if we think we're all set in terms of membership of the board, we are expecting Frank Daniels to join us. Frank, if you're there, you're very welcome. Frank has come in to replace Colin Lovegrove from the MHCLG team. So he's very welcome to join our happy throng. I'd also like in this welcome section of the agenda to say a very warm welcome to our 2 new board members. Since they've received their letters of appointment, it's now official, and they're members of the board. That is Daniel Moylan and Nick Shattock, who've already had a chance to introduce themselves by virtue of their involvement earlier in the day, and so everyone knows their face and their voice, and we're very, very lucky to have them on board, as will become apparent, I'm sure, during the rest of the day. I have to express regret that the local authority names are not yet official, but nevertheless, all concerned are able to contribute and are welcome to do so as observers until such time as their voting powers have been created, as it were. We've had some minutes circulated, which I hope everyone's had a chance to read, and if there are any corrections, now is your chance. If not, then any declarations of interest that we need to update or include in the register for this meeting and as necessary for future meetings as well. If there are no declarations of interest, then we can move on into part 1. Ian, if you're yes, John.
Sorry, just the standard declaration that there are a couple of items in Gresham area involving Gresham Borough Council. I've got no direct personal interest or connection to them, bar being the leader of Gresham Borough Council.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Just, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to make, I have no personal direct conflict of interest at all, but my son-in-law does work for Countryside and my daughter does work for Kier Construction. I think both are involved in projects on the site, but they don't have decision-making roles or any directorial director level involvement in those organisations. Thank you.
Duly noted, and very good of you to speak up. Thank you. So we're into part 1, and
has Michael just dropped off?
I've just come back, I think. It said, hold on a minute, so I did. So I'm just highlighting the fact that you report a partial return to the office use. You talk about HS1 matters, which may come up later, and then the updating of the business plan procedures. So could I then invite all who have read those papers to raise now any issues with Ian that you would like him to comment on? Yes, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I think obviously the issue of the Eurostar trains is obviously a very significant one, and I I know there are meetings being set up and maybe already taken place, and I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of how important we feel this is. I think it's an unusual decision for a business to make such a very long-standing and far-reaching decision not to use these trains. It is part of our regeneration. They are useful to people. It does help the economy, and I would hope for better from them, to be honest. And I just want to raise the issue that I'm grateful that we are pushing as hard as we can to get them re-established. On a similar point, we appear to be in the news again in the last couple of days with relation to both the testing centre with Ebbsfleet's name upon it, and the removal of that service and the removal of it to Rochester, and now of course the Brexit lorry park has reasserted itself, and I think there will be great concern locally, which I certainly share, to make sure that if this does happen, it's done properly. And there doesn't appear to be as much information this time around about the implications and operation of the potential lorry park. It hasn't even been confirmed yet, I don't think. I think we're just talking about a lot of rumour that's come out. I was wondering if Ian was aware of anything a bit more solid, and whether we do have an opportunity to learn more about how to is in the interest of local people, and people in the local community are protected from undue amounts of traffic.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So from what we know, and we have been pushing for a lot more detail about the operational aspects of the site. One of the design changes that they've made, I think, since they put the facility in place the first time, was the incorporation of what they call swim lanes. So the idea being that if vehicles are not being dealt with immediately, they are actually stored on site, or they are queued on site in these swim lanes rather than out on the highway. So we pushed quite hard on that, because we see that as one of the biggest risks, that the highway from the A2 up to the car park becomes blocked because lorries are queuing to get into the site. So they sought to reassure us that those swim lanes would solve that problem. I think at the moment, until the facility becomes operational and they are actually clear of how many vehicles are arriving and departing, then I don't think they can be totally sure whether the amount of swim lane capacity that they've put in will solve the problem. But that is a new feature of how they're going to operate the site that wasn't there before. So it would be fair to say, would it, that if the swim lane operates and is operating at the right capacity, that will mean that the lorries that are in the site will only be the lorries that would otherwise have been driving past the site anyway on the way to Dover. It doesn't generate any more traffic. My understanding from what you've said is that will deal with that issue. What it will do is it will hold capacity within this facility of lorries that are queuing to go through the facility, rather than them being stacked out on the local highway. Yes, that's what I meant. That's fine. That's fine. I get that. I get that. Well, obviously, in that case, you carry with me my my hope that we can persuade them and monitor that very carefully to make sure that happens. It's very important for local people. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, other points then in this section on the business plans, for example. Does anyone have any questions on those? I think it's an anticipated update of the usual slowish progression of these matters, but it all seems to be in hand. Ian, you're content that you don't need to add anything then?
No, the only one very small thing to add to Eurostar. I did write to the Chief Executive of Eurostar yesterday asking for the meeting in which we can explain the growth that is taking place in Ebbsfleet and the future plans. So we are definitely engaging as much as we can with Eurostar. We've also suggested to John McManus at the Ministry that the matter could be raised when a housing minister or communities minister next meets with a transport minister, which we know happens on regular occasions. So we'll be putting a short brief together for John to provide to his minister to raise it with a DFT minister at their next meeting.
I mean, on that, Ian, we are clear, are we, in terms of our own research and understanding, that there is the freedom to do what they've done with Ashford, which is reduce it down to 1 train a day without any recourse, because I thought this was a subject of a treaty obligation, if I dare mention that.
Our information is that it's public access, and actually there are no public service obligations on them at all. We did have a meeting with the commercial director from HS1 recently, and that was what they told us, because I asked that question, Michael, are there any obligations at all? And it appears not. So it's an open access arrangement that they have.
The only reason I would say that is possibly inconsistent with past government policy is, of course, that the whole point of putting a 9,000 car space requirement alongside this station was it was meant to be park and ride, so that people wanting to go to Paris didn't have to go into St Pancras.
Yes, it does seem in conflict with that, but we'll explore that more. But certainly the information we've had from HS1, who are pretty well informed on these things, are that it's an open access arrangement, and that is the problem, that there are no public service obligations on them to stop at Ebbsfleet or Ashford, as I understand it.
Fine, we'll reflect that in the minutes, but it's an important point for us. Thank you. So if the board agrees, I'd like to move on to Ebbsfleet Living report update, which shows how relatively busy things have been during this difficult period. And I was delighted personally to see how much volunteer work was coming in, and the running team and all that. You know, given the fact that we have 2,000 homes now sold, this community aspect is really coming together very well. So we've got Kevin with us. Are there any board questions about this report, please?
Chairman, it's Bob Lane. Can I just say, as usual, to Kevin, that this is very useful to see, because we wouldn't know, particularly in the current situation, just how much work is going on. So it's very helpful to see this, even if we don't ask many questions. But this week, I do actually have a short question, which is, does the new restriction on groups of 6 actually affect any of the work that they're doing at the moment?
Let's take David and then Jeremy, Kevin, and then you can answer them all together.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And mine was sort of around some of the broader aspects of support that we may be able to give. I guess as we think there may be a resurgence in the pandemic, there may be greater unemployment, sort of mental health issues, really coming back to this concept of what sort of drop-in community type centres, or how might we be able to operate those under government restrictions, because I suspect that that's probably where we could benefit the community most, by giving a lead in those sort of areas, as opposed to some of the more traditional community work that we've been doing, which we patently can't do going forward. So I'm interested to know how we're reflecting in our community work. What is the reality of life now for more and more people who sit within the Garden City area?
Then Jeremy, and then we'll move to Sandra. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more a comment arising from the timeliness of the paper. I think when Kevin drafted this, we were talking about the Ebbsfleet Community Board will be meeting in September. We did have a Zoom meeting, and it went actually very well. But it did reveal something. That is, I think it revealed, first of all, that there was a confidence amongst members about the way it was working. That we're beginning to settle into a pattern as to how it might work and contribute. But also, I think there was a feeling that we could introduce more local members. I know when we initially set this this up, there was a discussion of the number of people who are board, who are on board with the board. I actually think, and I think Kevin made the suggestion to me, and I absolutely agree, that we may feel secure even at this early stage to talk about having more local residents on board without necessarily matching them with any other kind of balancing number of board members or councillors or anything else. I think I'm starting to see that there's a sense of this beginning to fly almost without us, and I think therefore I don't know if Kevin wants to come in, but with his answer, but I think it would be very sensible for me to propose to you that we do actually start to go out and recruit more local residents to be part of it, and I think we can cope with that easily.
Thank you. And Sandra? Sandra, just unmute.
Sorry, I'm coming. Sorry, I couldn't make my mouse work. Thank you. There are a couple of points I want to make, and I'm going to make them in the reverse order to what I thought. With some other work I've been doing, etc., I think it may be time to review the community forum. It's only been running for 6 months or so, but Jeremy's just raised the question of membership. I would like to have a offline look at its roles and functionality, because I think it may have a potentially important role as the London Resort begins to come forward. So I just want to talk about that, but not here. I applaud Kevin and his team for the work that's been going on. And moving on, I have had a look at the online consultation on the community buildings and would quite like to feedback separately some thoughts around the design and layout of the buildings to make sure they work as potential small community businesses. And that's about configuration of larger spaces and things like the cafe, where you could have a server in where you can make money out of running events and things like that. But I'd quite like to deal with that offline. That's all.
Over to Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Just starting with Bob's comment then. Yes, Bob, we are looking, as I was writing the paper on the 9th of September was when the new restrictions came in. So we are looking at the new restrictions in terms of groups of 6. But as Jeremy said, the community board were very confident when we met them on the 1st of September that, you know, there is a desire for people to start coming out and for people to kind of helping each other, albeit very much in a very safe way and in a way that we communicate with the community in advance how safety is going to be addressed and what's going to be expected, and if we are going to have activities, how they're run. We have provisionally suggested a date of the 30th of October for our first kind of event that we were planning. We are looking at that in terms of the existing guidelines. There are specific guidelines for events and activities, and they're still encouraging arts activities to happen outside in a socially distanced way. So obviously within your group of 6 or within your family bubble, you need to stay within that, but there are ways of having activities and events that work around that. So we are looking with the community board, with specialist health and safety consultants, of what we can do to help people get out and about in that safe way. So there are specific restrictions, but they are ones that we can work with to make sure we can still do things, because there was a real desire for people to start getting back out, but in a safe way. Taking David's point on support, mental health is one that we specifically started to target. So Mary, who's our new project manager for health, and myself are meeting with the CCG in the next week to discuss what their plans are specifically to address mental health issues and whether there's things that we can do to help with that. Again, with our community board, there was sort of suggestion, you know, just people getting out, the edible EBS fleet, the growing, having things to look forward to would help with that. But more professionally, we'll be looking with the CCDG to see if there's something that they're not doing that perhaps we can do on a local basis to help with that. In terms of specific groups, we are specifically working with the schools at the minute to see if there's anything we can help them with. Not things that the schools should be doing themselves, but is there some equipment or technology or things we can do to help the schools function better with that? So, for example, we're looking with them, maybe helping them with the external classrooms, or again, this kind of edible gardens for every school, spaces outside that'll help them with sort of social distancing, but also to implement some of the works. So one of the examples I have in the paper this month is what we've done with Eversley Academy, where we've given them some funding just to allow them to kind of separate their playground areas that it still can be used in a safe way. Again, it was really great that you've picked out, there's a lot of community people doing things on the ground at the minute. So we have been dealing with them specifically and said, is there anything they need in terms of equipment or some, small assistance that would help them continue to do the meets and events that they're doing? Because again, they're the heart of the community. If we can help them, help the community to get out and about and have confidence, that would be our main priority. So sometimes little bits of funding or little bits of equipment might help them just have that outdoor running club or that HIT group or things to work. So that's what we're asking them for at the minute. And those are sort of groups that are working out of the community centres and ones that are doing outside. In terms of the community board, Jeremy, we've already started now to kind of draft up that call for interest. I was going to get a couple of quotes from community board members because at the last event, some of them sort of saying why they've joined and what they feel they've got from the group and how they see it going forward. I think that's kind of what we want to tell people who might be interested. So I've asked a couple of them to give me quotes before we go out and kind of do a call for interest in that. Taking Sandra's point, in the community buildings, I think these are, they're very timely because they're starting to respond to the learning from lockdown survey they did, and also having community board input. So, for example, things like having work hubs or the Zoom rooms or whatever they happen to be in your little neighbourhood room or your neighbourhood community centre are really integral to that. We saw last month that there was some interest in people starting businesses. So again, we're starting to reflect that and having spaces within the buildings. For example, people who want to, we've heard a number of people who want to start baking or creating or teaching baking, things like that. So again, making sure the kitchens and things in the community buildings are big enough to accommodate that has been part of the brief. But this is what we're doing with these buildings at the minute is actually going to the community before we even tie down the brief to make sure we're reflecting community's ambitions and ideas. So we haven't really started designing these buildings in any detail yet. What we wanted to do was make sure we had the community input first and then start to develop that business case and develop up the design, but making sure it was responding to sort of local need and ambition. So they're very early stage for these buildings and there's lots of time still for us to kind of influence them. So we can look at that offline as well, Sandra.
All very good.
Yeah, can I just come back to you, Kevin, a moment on this about providing relevant help and support for people, because I think there will be agencies that are near our area or in our area that could potentially come out into the community to provide some of that support and services. And interestingly, at the DWP board yesterday, we were talking about how we created alternative accommodation for work coaches or for people that are helping people prepare their CVs when actually we don't have sufficient space under the new COVID rules to accommodate the doubling of work coaches, for instance, between now and March. So we're looking for them to go out into the community and to find space in the community, which also appears to work quite well with a lot of people that they prefer to meet in the community than coming into a job centre plus to do it. And I'm thinking there must be other agencies that would also be able to do that, and we may be able to actually act as a bit of a link between those agencies and some of the space we currently have, because then we'd be providing some real time support for the community, not just thinking about what we might be doing in the future.
Can I just say quickly that I think that could be an argument for some pop-up building, because we don't have much space available. That's the issue, isn't it? But I think that to create some pop-up space for that kind of support framework for coaching to work, coaching to support mental health to work might be a really good winner for us.
Kevin, any points on that?
No, just to say we're very much on board with that, David. So we have on our site at the minute put all the links to potential support mechanisms and other grants and everything that's coming out. We've been working with SELUP in particularly because they're starting to run a number of potential funds for economy and employment. So I think moving forward, Ian's already kind of given us a brief to kind of look at this employment area and see if there's anything we can do in terms of skills and linking people to that at the minute. And again, it's something we haven't got the answer to at the minute, but we're certainly looking into see what we can do in that area. Well, and again, Sandra, pop-up space is something we're constantly looking at. Is there opportunities for us to do that? But you're right, we need to kind of look for at the minute, again, Ian's kind of commissioned us to look at sites and see which ones are the most likely that we could perhaps do this on, and again, sort of follow up on that.
I mean, obviously, Eastgate operates reasonably well for us and its related activities, and any pop-up facility could be sited around that complex, as it were. Yeah. All very fine. So we're moving on to the planning paper now, which in summary you'll see reports on LRCH matters and also a slight tick up in the housing completion numbers. We're beginning to see some greater activity there, which is for all very good news. Are there any questions, please, from board members on planning matters?
Can I, Michael?
And then Bob, yeah.
Just to say that I noticed at section 5, the special development order for the function, the lorry park, etc., on car part D, and the timescale that it's approved for, and that we will need to as was already raised, very carefully monitor that and make sure that it works with us, not against us.
And Bob?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. It was on paragraph 8 about starts and completions. I'd sort of been reading all these articles in the property press about the flight to the suburbs and to the edge of London. So I was a little bit surprised to see the starts still so low. I just wonder whether Mark or anybody's got any anecdotal information to suggest that things are picking up a bit more than that, because obviously if you extrapolate that figure, the starts for the year are obviously we know it's been disrupted, but the sort of discussions, as I say, about the housing market suggested to me, anyway, I was expecting the numbers to start going up a little bit more. But I just wonder whether there's any sign of that on the ground.
Mark?
Yes, thanks, Bob. I think that at the moment we're in a situation where there's quite a lot of properties that have been started and not completed. So if you look at the graph on the dashboard, that is fairly high in comparison to what we would normally see. So it isn't as though the developers are holding back on any particular phases. Redrow, for example, have recently started phase 4. Taylor Wimpey have recently started some phases within Castle Hill. So there aren't any developers that are particularly sort of waiting for to start any particular phases. We know that Countryside are very keen to be starting on Ashmere, which should be hopefully taking place in the next month or so, and we should be getting the first completions out of Keepmoat, which would be a really good step forward over the next month as well. So there isn't anything sort of particular that I'm aware of on site that's sort of showing any particular problems. But obviously next month will be our half-year review.
Thank you.
Anything else on planning, please? Okay, I'm going to slot in comms now because we have a very full report on press and media this time after a break in August, and very good coverage of the bridge, of course, our first great triumph. And are there any questions, please, for Mark on comms?
Mark's actually on leave, Michael. If there are any questions from the board, I'll do my best to answer them.
Of course. Most of it being illustrated fully explains itself, doesn't it? But yeah. Does anybody have anything they'd like to raise? Okay, I'm getting agreement that we can move on to finance. Gerard, I think, is probably available if there are any questions, but mostly it covers familiar data about our finance and headcount and so on. Questions for Gerard? Everyone's content. That's nice. And so that completes part 1. We've got the questions from members of the public, which have been circulated, have received comment and are ready to be installed on the website. And so we take those as read as usual and close part 1 and say thank you to our public who are viewing.
Thank you.